rivalry games are the bread and butter of college football. Sure, the NFL has division rivals and some niche player rivalries, but nothing is quite as powerful as college rivalries that can bring the absolute best out of horrendous teams to stand up to giants. These rivalry games have given us so much gold. The kick six in the Iron Bowl, the play from the big game between Cal and Stanford, he has trouble with the snap, is something you can say and any Michigan fan will immediately melt into a puddle of tears. But in recent days, a new rivalry has formed, a rivalry that, my God, may just be one of the greatest span of games of all time between Alabama and Kirby Smart's Georgia. But before we get into that, let's get into today's sponsor, Arena Club. Because as much as I love nostalgia of looking back at old football games, I also love the nostalgia that I used to have as a young kid just cracking open some packs. I mean, from Magic to Pokemon, even some football cards where I still have some ungraded cards I absolutely love, like OBJ hitting a kickoff or Tom Brady punting the ball from Dual Threat series. Heck, I even have a signed Ray Guy card. And now, you can have a little bit of that nostalgia back with Arena Club. Because with slab packs, you can score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price, and Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value as well as a complete view of all the possible cards with clear hit rates for each one. On top of that, whenever you crack open a slab pack, Arena Club is going to make you an immediate offer for your card based on its market value that you can accept on the spot instantly with no ifs, ands, or buts and fishing around to try to resell a card you're not interested in collecting yourself. And every pack has a grail, like a 2003 Charizard, 2007 Upper Deck Exquisite LeBron James, or how about a Patrick Mahomes 2017 Panini Contenders. The possibilities are endless in ways that you can expand your personal collection by getting gem mints for a fraction of their actual cost. And I personally love doing stuff like this because I specifically have nothing in particular that I'm looking for. So I'm happy to open whatever I get, and if I'm not interested in it, I just resell it. It's literally awesome. So if you want to hop in, go to arenaclub.com/punts and use code punts to get a whopping 20% off your first slab purchase. And if you know anything about buying packs, 20% off is like, it's a little bit crazy. Nobody really does that. That's arenaclub.com/punts, 20% off, and use code punts to get that 20% off too, and relive some of your childhood. Thank me later. But where to even start with this modern masterpiece of a rivalry? It only makes sense to give you a little backstory on both teams, so we'll start with Alabama. And for those who might be relatively new to football, you're like, yeah, Alabama's always been good. That's because you've only been watching for like 2 or 3 years. And since I've been watching since all the way back when they had AJ McCarron as quarterback, I can let you know that, yeah, you're right, they've always been like this. There are pretty much no words to describe how good Alabama has been at football in my lifetime, so I'll try to put some numbers to it. Just for when they were under the leadership of legendary coach Nick Saban, they have had a collective record of all time of 201 wins and 29 losses in 17 seasons. For some further perspective, I grew up being a Washington State Cougars fan who only really started to pay attention to football in the early 2000s, and if you just watched the Cougs from the time that Nick Saban took over at Alabama, you would have seen us get to as many losses in our first 3 years as he would get his entire time coaching at Tuscaloosa. And he wasn't just winning like meaningless games, he would bring home 6 national championship trophies in his time there. And as much as you may not want to believe it, my conspiracy is the whole reason they invented the college football playoff was just to make it harder for this Nick Saban-led Alabama team to win it all. They were ranked number 1 at least once every year while Saban was there, and it is honestly in my firm and God-given belief that the only reason to not start Alabama at number 1 every season was so that your news article could get some clicks and generate some site traffic for having a hot take. On top of that, this team had the target painted on their back every single game they played. You better believe every team for the better part of a decade and a half had Bama circled week 1 on their calendars, and even with all that, they never truly had it down here. Maybe 2010, their lone year with 3 losses, but no other coach and team combination has had such a tremendous grip on college football as the Saban-Alabama combo. In other schools, came in looking for that magic, so much so that his assistant coaches were getting snatched up like golden apples. Here's just a very short list of some prominent coaches from the Saban tree. Miami's Mario Cristobal, New York Giants' Brian Daboll, Ole Miss's Lane Kiffin. I could do this all day, so I'm going to make the segue quicker and get to the point. And that's getting to one of his most promising Padawans, Kirby Smart. So Kirby Smart coached under Saban for 8 years as his defensive coordinator, and not just any 8 years, but from 07 to 15, largely helping Saban lay the groundwork for the defense that defined the Crimson Tide of Alabama. And in 2015, who would come knocking but the University of Georgia, who at the time was looking to replace one of their great head coaches in Mark Richt. And while Georgia was by no means a slouch of a team, they were far from the dominating force that Alabama was, only beating Saban's Alabama in the first year that he was there in 2007, which I almost don't even count because it was just such a weird year for that team. So aside from that one win, they were 0-3 and had a negative 43-point differential across those 3 games. So up to this point, it easily wasn't a rivalry. But things were going to change as we enter Chapter 1, Kirby taking over Georgia.
Be named Georgia's new football coach, Christine Leahy, gave you that update. But Georgia goes out and hires a guy, number 1, who has never been a head coach. Not even for an hour. And are you really sure he made Alabama's defense great?
We're going to immediately jump to 2017, the first time that these two teams will see each other. Kirby's second year leading the Dogs, and they had made all the jumps possible to become an absolutely dominant team. With a stacked defense, they would start their tirade, sneaking past a top 25 Notre Dame in just a heavyweight match, back and forth, defensive grinding, fighting tooth and nail for every single inch of yardage, bending but never breaking to this incredibly high-powered Notre Dame offense, who would later go on to be one of the most dynamic offenses that year in college football, and keeping them to 4 field goals as they would hold on to win by 1 point. Then, facing number 17 Mississippi State, they would prove where they truly stood in the SEC, sending a message by only letting them get past midfield 3 times all game in a lopsided 31-3 blowout. And it didn't just stop with that. Tennessee would fall 41-0, Vanderbilt would go down 45-14, Missouri and Florida would be dominated as it seemed like this Bulldog team couldn't be stopped as they rolled past the Gamecocks. Their defense was impenetrable, their offense was rolling, until they ran into number 10 Auburn at Auburn. And this isn't an easy place to play. They made a gaggle of mistakes, maybe even a chance that they had looked past them thinking things would always be easy. And they would get brutalized as they would score on their first drive and then watch Auburn take a lead through 3 field goals compared to Georgia's 3 and outs. Before a second quarter Auburn touchdown was the mighty bottle opener for the can of ice cold whoop ass that was coming in the second half, as this game would eventually end with a whopping 40-17 victory for the Auburn Tigers. With that in their rearview, they demolished their following 2 opponents and got back to the SEC championship, where you would expect this rivalry to begin. But in reality, they had to rematch Auburn, and why is Alabama not here? Well, I'm glad you asked, because on the other side of the SEC, Alabama was up to their old hijinks. They opened the season as number 1 overall in college football, as they would absolutely go on a tear. The Florida Seminoles, ranked at number 3, would score only a single time in this low-to-the-ground matchup, while their star quarterback Jalen Hurts would begin to show what he was all about, as they would stomp Fresno State, Colorado State. Vanderbilt and Ole Miss would be the sacrificial lambs, losing by a total of 125-3, as they wanted to show the SEC who the big dogs were, despite Georgia's equally hot start. They had Jalen Hurts throwing the rock, Tua Tagovailoa backing him up, one of the most dynamic receiving corps of all times, with Calvin Ridley, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs. Even Devontae Smith was catching some passes for them at the time before his big breakout year. It was one of the all-time great teams, which, when you look at the scores they are putting up, makes sense, especially backed by a defense consisting of 13 future NFL players. So as they continued their tirade over Texas A&M, Arkansas, Tennessee, LSU, Mississippi State, and Mercer, they got to the Iron Bowl and somehow lost to Auburn, who also beat the number 1 overall ranked Georgia 2 weeks prior after, losing to number 3 Clemson and an unranked LSU. And man, I just need to make a video about 2017 Auburn. They confuse me so much. But that's how Alabama would miss the SEC championship. But after Georgia reaffirmed their dominance by throttling Auburn 28-7, once again, Auburn, very confusing team, the way that the chips fell, Alabama and Georgia were both able to make it into the playoffs.
How about Georgia? Hasn't won a national championship since Herschel Walker in 1980. They have an opportunity to be one step away from that in the game against the Sooners. The Alabama Crimson Tide, for the fourth straight year, we have a first time that two teams from the same conference are going to the playoffs.
So on one side, Alabama had to finish off their mid-2010 rivalry with Clemson, which is almost what this series was about, but it wasn't because of how things ended, partly because Alabama just slowly, surely bled out the Tigers over 60 minutes, forced 7 punts and 2 field goals, and put up 2 touchdowns of their own on offense while picking off Kelly Bryant twice, one of which for a pick 6 to end this game 24-6, which was almost as bad as what Clemson would do to them the next time they met up, as this particular rivalry just did not have an exciting ending. On the flip side, Georgia came face to face with a high-powered Oklahoma offense featuring Baker Mayfield throwing to CeeDee Lamb, Hollywood Brown, Dimitri Flowers, and Mark Andrews. No one all year was able to hold them to under 30 points, with their 2 lowest scoring games coming against a very strong Ohio State team and Iowa State. Their one loss of the year for whatever reason, but Georgia decided, you know what, we can have a shift of ideology too. Instead of trying to bring down their offense, Jake Fromm, Sonny Michael, and Nick Chubb would get to work, where my favorite stat is that somehow in this game with over 100 total points scored, over 1,000 total yards of offense, there were still 13 punts, with one of the biggest game changers for Georgia being when their punter Cameron Nizilik started the Sooners inside their own 23 times with an insanely clutch 61-yard punt to the 2-yard line, where while Georgia was trailing, they forced the Sooners to punt back, allowing Georgia to tie it up, where another pick and another touchdown turned the tide in their favor. So now, with the SEC firmly setting the precedent that they were one of the most dominant divisions in college football, slaying 2 giants from other divisions, it was time to figure out if this gritty Georgia team could usurp the long-reigning Alabama as the SEC team to beat, as well as claiming their first national championship in 37 years, as the initial iteration of this rivalry game was underway. And it opens with a strong Alabama stand as Tony Brown gets an electric interception. But this was all that would go right for Alabama for a long time. They would drive down the field after that interception, and in a twist of fate, something would happen to Saban that happened to Saban far too often, and it was his kicker missing a very makeable field goal. The two teams now, high-ranked punters, would go back and forth before Georgia would rely on the famed Lego-loving leg of Rodrigo Blankenship to put them back up before forcing another punt, driving 70 yards for another hot rod field goal to put them up 6. J.K. Scott, the Alabama punter, would do everything to keep them backed up for a drive, but another Alabama punt gave Georgia room to drive, so they made like Vin Diesel and drove fast and furiously, going up another 7 points before the end of the half to the dismay of Alabama fans. And at this point, the Alabama quarterback Jalen Hurts not only couldn't get a drive going, he couldn't seem to find the keys to get him into the ignition. So in half 2, they would do one of the most unthinkable moves in sports and bench their starting quarterback and throw in a young throwing Samoan, Tua Tagovailoa, whose first drive would honestly end the same way. Due to an untimely sack, they would have to again send out J.K. Scott to try to save them. Something had to give for Alabama if they wanted to get back in it, and who was going to make the play but Trayvon Diggs, who would return a Nizilik punt 14 yards to start the Crimson Tide near midfield. Here, Tua would finally settle in and turn the corner. With the combination of his legs and throwing the ball to Henry Ruggs, in just 7 plays, they traversed the 56 yards between them and the end zone, and all of a sudden, Alabama was on board. Now, this joy wouldn't live long as McCole Hardman beat his man by a step, so on 3rd and long, Jake Fromm would deliver an absolute dime for the 80-yard touchdown to regain a 13-point lead. But this is where things would get weird. Tua would get picked off by Baker, then Fromm would immediately get picked off as well, giving Bama a 43-yard field goal to bring themselves within 10 points. Both defenses would force a punt, Bama forcing 2 before Tua would lock in, dicing and slicing this Bulldog defense, driving 71 yards to the 12, where he would give their kicker an easy chip shot field goal before Georgia, looking to not lose rather than win, would run the ball 3 times in a row and be forced to punt it back, and now Tua had the chance to tie it up. And although Georgia would hold strong for most plays, a huge pass interference penalty on 3rd and 8, followed by a 20-yard pass, would set Tua up to eventually drive the ball into the end zone. But now Georgia was on their back foot and only took 54 seconds off the clock before punting it back to where Diggs would once again get a big return to put Bama in prime scoring position. And not just that, but Tua and Najee Harris would be spectacular, wasting time off the clock and being able to take a knee at the 17 to send their kicker out to lock this game. Oh my gosh, and he missed it. The game was still on and it was heading to overtime. Georgia, feeling their chances to win their first national championship in years slip away, looked like a deer in headlights. They'd pick up 4 yards before Jake Fromm would take a costly 13-yard sack, forcing them to attempt a 51-yard field goal. Now, luckily for them, Hot Rod Blankenship was about to make a name for himself as he absolutely sinks it, giving that Georgia defense the spark they needed. One stop and the national championship was theirs. The title of the best SEC team was theirs. Play 1, they bring it as Tua fakes the screen, looks around, but he's seeing ghosts. The Georgia defense is swarming. He tries to find anything but ends up on the ground 16 yards from the line of scrimmage, setting up 2nd and 26, a number that will live in infamy for Georgia fans and glory for Alabama fans. 41 yards from the end zone now, he drops back. One singular head shake to widen the safety to create a hole for Devontae Smith and rips it. When that ball was in the air, time stood still. The camera pans. Devontae Smith is by himself, but the ball is not in frame. Georgia was sending a prayer, please let it be overthrown, but God responded as that ball slowly descended. Just 2 words. Roll Tide and let the rivalry begin.
So